6 minutes to fire. That was the number blinking on my wrist screen when the alien fleet dropped out of warp above the station, and every alarm on the ring started screaming at once. My name is Ronan Vance, and I was not supposed to be in that room. I was a junior translator, cleared only for basic trade language, standing in the back of a chamber built for people far more important than me, while 40 armed ships hung silent in the black outside the window. The ceasefire was 7 hours old, and already breaking apart at the seams. The alien commander stood across the long table from our delegation. Her name was Euthera Sol, and her people, the Calveni, had fought humanity to a standstill 3 years earlier, in a war that neither side had truly won. She was tall, with skin the color of wet slate, and she had not blinked once since the meeting began. Behind her, through the viewport, her warships drifted closer with every passing minute, engines glowing like slow embers. Our ambassador, a tired man named Elliot Marsh, was losing the room. His voice cracked on every sentence. The translation device on the table between them flattened his words into a toneless, robotic version of the Calveni language, and I could see Euthera's patience thinning with every clumsy phrase it produced. She thought we were mocking her. She thought the flat, lifeless translations were an insult, a sign that humans considered her language beneath real effort. She was wrong, but nobody in that room could tell her that. Nobody except me, and I was not allowed to speak. I had spent 2 years secretly studying the real Calveni language, the version built on rising and falling tones that the trade devices could never capture. I did it at night, alone, replaying old recordings until my throat ached. Nobody knew, because officially, no human had ever learned to speak it correctly. The tones were too difficult for our vocal cords, or so everyone believed. I had never told a soul I could do it, because admitting it felt like admitting I had wasted 2 years on something impossible. 5 minutes to fire. The number on my wrist ticked down. Euthera rose from her seat, and the air in the room went cold. In flat trade language, the translation device rendered her words as simple as a child's sentence. "You insult me with silence dressed as speech," she said. "We came expecting honesty. We found puppets." Elliot tried to answer, but his voice shook, and the device turned his apology into something even more hollow than before. I watched Euthera's jaw tighten. I watched her hand move toward the small communicator on her wrist, the one connected directly to her fleet. 4 minutes to fire. I do not remember deciding to stand up. I remember the chair scraping against the floor, and every head in the room turning toward me, including the 2 security officers near the door, who looked ready to drag me out before I could embarrass the entire delegation. Elliot hissed my name like a warning. I ignored him. I looked at Euthera Sol, and for the first time since the meeting began, I spoke without the device. I used the real language, the one built on tone instead of flat words, the one I had never spoken aloud to another living person. My throat did not want to cooperate. My heart was slamming so hard I could feel it in my ears, but I forced the first phrase out anyway, low and rising, exactly the way I had practiced it 1,000 times alone in the dark. The phrase was an old form of respect, reserved for acknowledging an opponent whose strength you do not question. Roughly, it meant this: your fire does not shame us. It teaches us, and we are grateful for the lesson. The room went silent in a way that felt physical, like the air itself had stopped moving. Euthera Sol turned to look at me directly for the first time. Her expression did not change, not at first, and for 3 agonizing seconds, I thought I had made a catastrophic mistake, that I had twisted some sacred phrase into something offensive, that I was about to become the reason the ceasefire collapsed completely. Then her skin began to change color. It started at her collarbone, a deep blue spreading upward across her neck and face like ink released into water. Her eyes widened slightly. Behind her, 2 of her officers actually stepped back, and I heard one of them whisper something in rapid, low tones that even I could not fully follow. 3 minutes to fire, my wrist screen said, but nobody in that room was looking at their screens anymore. Elliot grabbed my sleeve and pulled me half a step back, whispering that I needed to sit down immediately, that I had no idea what I had just done. I did not sit down. I could not look away from Yathira, whose blue had deepened until it covered nearly her entire face, vivid and unmistakable, even under the harsh lighting of the chamber. She raised a hand toward her fleet officer, the one standing by the communicator, and for one terrible heartbeat, I thought she was giving the order to fire. Instead, she said something sharp and fast, and the officer's hand dropped away from the console entirely. "Hold position." The translation device finally caught up and rendered, though by then, the real meaning had already reached me directly. 2 minutes to fire became 2 minutes of nothing happening at all, which felt somehow more frightening than the countdown itself. Yathira stepped around the table, closer to me than any Calveni had ever stood to a human in that entire negotiation. Her officers watched with visible tension, hands hovering near their sides, unsure whether to protect her or restrain me. "Where did you learn our true tongue?" she asked, still in the tonal language, and I answered honestly, because lying felt impossible under that stare. "Alone," I said, "at night. For 2 years, I thought no one would ever need to hear it." She studied me for a long moment, and the blue in her skin did not fade. I learned later, from a very shaken cultural officer who cornered me outside the chamber afterward, that the color change was not embarrassment or anger, as I had feared. It was something far rarer among her people. It was the physical response to being truly seen, to having someone reach past the surface performance of diplomacy and speak to the actual person standing there, with real effort, without shortcuts. It happened, perhaps once in a lifetime, between two Calveni who had known each other for decades. It had never happened, not once in recorded history, because of an outsider. "You risked everything," Yathira said, still watching me, and for a moment I thought she meant it as an accusation. "I had nothing else that would work," I told her. The flat words were failing. I did not think. I only knew I had spent 2 years for a reason, and this felt like the reason. Her fleet remained motionless outside the window. 1 minute to fire ticked past on my wrist, and simply kept counting into negative numbers that no longer meant anything, because the countdown clock had been built around an attack that was no longer coming. Yathira turned to Elliot Marsh, who looked more frightened of me in that moment than he had been of the entire alien fleet a few minutes earlier. She spoke again, and this time the flat device translation and the real meaning finally matched, because her tone had settled into something calmer. "Your ambassador speaks with machines," she said. "This one speaks with effort. I will negotiate with the one who tried." The room erupted into a strange kind of chaos after that. Officials arguing in low, urgent voices, security officers exchanging confused glances, Elliot stammering something about protocol that nobody was listening to. I stood in the middle of it, feeling like the floor might give way beneath me at any moment, my hands shaking so badly I had to press them against the table to stay steady. Yathira Sol requested, in front of everyone, that I remain in the room for the rest of the negotiation, not as a translator, as the person she would speak to directly. Elliot tried to object, citing my rank, my inexperience, the fact that I held no official diplomatic authority at all. Yathira did not argue with him. She simply stated, in a tone that left no room for debate, that the negotiation would continue only if I stayed. I stayed. Over the following 2 hours, the true shape of the ceasefire took form, built not on flat trade language, but on real conversation, tone by tone, effort matched with effort. Yathira's fleet powered down their weapons systems fully by the end of the first hour, something none of our military analysts had believed possible without a signed treaty already in hand. She told me later, once the tension had finally drained from the room, that her people had assumed for years that humans considered their language a novelty, not worth the effort of true mastery. My 2 years of quiet, secret practice had undone that assumption in a single sentence. By the time the meeting ended, the fleet outside the window had turned away entirely, engines cooling, weapons bays sealed. Elliot Marsh shook my hand in the corridor afterward, his relief so total that he could barely form a full sentence. Officials from 3 other delegations had already requested transcripts of what happened, eager to understand how a junior translator, with no authority, had done what an entire negotiating team could not. I did not feel triumphant walking back to my quarters that night. Mostly I felt hollowed out, exhausted, my legs unsteady from adrenaline that had nowhere left to go. I sat on the edge of my bunk and thought about 2 years of whispered practice, about how close everything had come to ending in fire instead of conversation, about how a single correct tone had changed the outcome of something far larger than myself. Ythera Sol found me 2 days later, in the quiet observation deck where I had been avoiding the sudden attention my name had gathered across the station. She stood beside me at the viewport, watching the stars in silence for a long moment before speaking. "You will continue these talks with me," she said, "not because you were assigned, because you understood something your own people did not." I asked her what that was. "That real connection is never about the words you are given," she said. "It is about the effort you choose to spend when no one is watching." I did not have an answer for that, so I simply nodded, and we stood together in silence, watching her fleet hold steady in the dark beyond the station, no longer a threat, but something closer to an understanding neither of us had expected to find.